Mara Ellison was known in her small Georgia town as the girl who rarely spoke. Quiet, withdrawn, always watching the world with those wide, frightened, hazel eyes. People whispered about her silence, wondered if she was strange, stubborn, or simply broken. But silence was the only thing that had ever protected her. The truth was something no one wanted to look at too closely, especially not the man who had forced silence into her life since she was 13, her mother's boyfriend, Randall Gage, a man who smiled at the world with perfect teeth but hid his rage like a knife. Welcome to Shadows of Justice, where crime meets compassion. If you are new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and share. For returning viewers, thanks for sticking to the channel. For years, Mara learned the rules of survival. Walk softly, answer quickly, never argue, never cry too loudly, and above all, never reveal what happened behind closed doors. Randall had warned her once, in a voice that still echoed in the back of her skull. "Open your mouth about anything, and I'll make sure you never speak again." So Mara didn't. Not when he hit her. Not when he controlled everything she did, and certainly not when she stood over the body of the man Randall had killed. It had happened on a cold February night, a debt, a threat, a man named Victor Lane lying face down on the living room carpet, blood seeping into the fibers. Mara's hands were trembling so violently she thought her bones would crack. Randall turned to her slowly. "You know what you're going to do," he said. There was no question in his voice, only possession. "You were here. You'll say you did it." Her throat sealed shut. "And if I don't?" she whispered. He grabbed her chin so hard she gasped. "Then your mother dies, and anyone who finds out dies. You understand?" She did. Mara wiped her fingerprints across the knife. She sat on the floor and waited for the sirens. She accepted the handcuffs with her head bowed. The officers repeated questions she didn't answer. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She took the fall for a crime she didn't commit. And when the prosecutor demanded a statement, she shook her head. When the judge asked her why she refused counsel, she stared at the floor. When the jury watched her with confusion, she held her silence like a shield. They called her cold. They called her remorseless. They called her guilty. She said nothing, because Randall was always watching. Even from the gallery while she sat at trial, she could feel his stare carving into her back, warning, threatening, promising unimaginable consequences. She received 22 years in state prison, and Mara walked into the cell block at age 20 with no voice left at all. Prison was loud, metal doors slamming, officers shouting, women crying into their mattresses at night. But Mara still said nothing. She kept her eyes down, her steps light, her existence barely a ripple. For the first year, no one could get more than a nod out of her. But there was one person who wouldn't leave her alone, Officer Dana Knox, a corrections officer known for her fairness and her refusal to be intimidated. She watched Mara closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. "Ellison," she said one day during meal service, "do you ever talk?" Mara froze. Dana studied her face, the flinch, the tight breath, the fear. "You're not dangerous. You're hiding." That scared Mara more than anything, because no one had ever seen her so clearly. Months passed. Dana kept trying. Small questions, casual comments, soft encouragement, nothing ever forced. Mara found herself looking forward to those quiet moments, even though she still couldn't respond. But the dam finally cracked one night during a lockdown caused by a fight in another unit. The cell block lost power. Screams echoed. Someone shoved Mara in the dark. She stumbled, hit the wall, slid to the floor, shaking like a little girl again. She didn't realize Dana had found her until she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. "Mara, please look at me." She did. and with tears she hadn't shed in years, she whispered the first words she had said in the entire 18 months she'd been locked up. "Help." It wasn't a confession, it wasn't even a statement, but it was enough for Dana to know that Mara Ellison was not a murderer. Dana contacted Detective Aaron Grady, a man with a reputation for opening cold cases when something didn't sit right. Grady spent weeks reviewing Mara's file. The inconsistencies were glaring. No motive, no history of violence, evidence oddly too neat, and a boyfriend with a violent past who somehow had no alibi but was never questioned thoroughly. When Grady requested an interview with Mara, Dana escorted her into the private visitation room. "Mara," he said gently, "I believe something happened to you long before that night, and I think someone forced you into taking the blame." She stared at the table, hands trembling uncontrollably. "I can't help you unless you talk to me." Dana stepped closer. "You spoke once," she said softly. "You can do it again."
And Mara tried. She opened her mouth, her lips parted, but no sound came out, not even a breath of a word. The terror of Randall's threats pressed against her chest until she thought she would suffocate. Grady exchanged a glance with Dana. "Whoever you're protecting," he said, "is still controlling you." Mara flinched. Grady leaned forward. "If you can't tell me what happened, can you write it?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. The officers brought in a pen and paper. Mara picked it up with shaking fingers. But instead of writing a confession, instead of naming Randall, instead of retelling the crime, she wrote just one sentence. "I will speak when he confesses." Dana swallowed hard. Grady stared. It wasn't a refusal, it was a challenge. Grady reopened the investigation quietly. He reviewed old witness statements, re-examined crime scene photos, revisited the timeline. Randall's story made no sense. His fingerprints had been found on the doorknob, claimed as normal. He had injuries he said came from work. His history with domestic violence had been glossed over because no one wanted to testify against him. But the biggest red flag came from Victor Lane's missing phone. When Grady finally traced it, hours of deleted messages emerged from backup data. Threats, debt warnings, a recorded voicemail. And at the end of the voicemail, Victor said something chilling. "Randall, if you don't pay me by tomorrow." The message cut off. This alone wasn't enough for a confession, but Grady knew who Randall really was. A man who loved control but hated suspicion. A man whose ego couldn't stand being accused. So he set a trap. He told Randall that new forensic technology was being used on old evidence, that they had found inconsistencies, that several investigators questioned his version of events. Randall laughed at first, but then he saw something he hadn't expected. A photo Dana Knox had taken of Mara in prison, her face hollow, her arms bruised, her eyes dead. "This is what you did to her," Grady said. Randall's grin faded. "She won't talk," Grady continued. "She won't say a single word. She's waiting for yours." Those words struck Randall's pride like a hammer. "What do you mean she's waiting on me?" "She refuses to speak," Grady said, "until her abuser confesses." The room fell silent. And for the first time in his life, Randall Gage lost control. She said that? She called me her abuser?" Grady didn't answer. Randall paced the room, fists clenching, breathing ragged. His mask cracked. "She'd be nothing without me," he hissed. "She owed me. Everything she had came from me." Grady watched calmly. "She should be grateful I didn't do worse after all the things she—" He stopped. Too late. Every word had been recorded. 2 weeks later, they brought Mara to the small prison visitation room. Dana stood beside her. Grady sat across from her with a folder full of evidence. A video recorder was set on the table. And then Randall was brought in, handcuffed, furious, pacing like an animal trapped in its own lies. "You ruined everything," he shouted at her. "You think you can get me locked up? You think anyone will believe you?" Then Grady pressed play. Randall's own voice filled the room. "She should be grateful I didn't do worse." Randall froze. Mara didn't blink. Grady shut off the recorder. "Randall Gage," Grady said, "you just confessed to the abuse and coercion of a minor who served prison time for your crime. You are under arrest for murder, coercion, witness intimidation, and sexual assault." Randall lunged, screaming, but the officers dragged him back. Through it all, Mara sat still, breathing, trembling, alive. Dana squeezed her hand gently. "It's over," she whispered. "He can't hurt you now." And for the first time since she was 13, Mara found her voice again. She looked up, her lips parted, and she said, barely above a whisper, "He killed Victor, not me." Dana's eyes filled with tears. Grady nodded once firmly. "Thank you, Mara. Now we can bring you home." It took 6 months before the state officially overturned her conviction. Another 3 before she stepped outside the prison gates. Mara stood under the open sky, breathing freedom she had almost forgotten how to smell. Dana waited for her with a coat and a warm hug. "You don't owe anyone silence ever again," Dana said. Mara looked toward the horizon. "No," she whispered, "I don't." She began therapy. She worked with victim advocacy groups. Slowly, she relearned how to speak, not just in words, but in breath, in hope, in presence. And when she told her story publicly for the first time, standing before a room of survivors, she ended with a sentence that had become her vow. "I was silent for him, but now I speak for every woman who can't." The room stood, applauded, wept. And Mara Ellison, who once couldn't speak, found her voice stronger than ever. This is Shadows of Justice, where crime meets compassion. Subscribe for more emotional true crime and redemption storytelling, where every scar tells a story worth hearing.